Welcome everyone. I hope anyway, all of you who are here now saw the second email I sent on Monday. Again, this is just the kind of thing that seems to be rampant on various platforms over the last 2 weeks, at least in my experience. So I don't want to waste a lot of time except to say that I ended up having to create a whole new account and password for Zoom, even though I've had the same account. No one said that was at all required at the JC or on Zoom's own platform. So for whatever reason, maybe security, I heard that they're trying to increase security. So I was able to actually log two, or I think it was three students on Monday. And because we were 30 plus minutes after this normal start time, I didn't finish the slides that we would have normally done. So what that means for you guys is two things. I recorded that lecture, only the first three slides. So I'll go ahead and tell you what they were, but I'm not, of course, going to go backwards now because we need to catch up, but we'll be able to do that by the middle or end of next week, either Monday or Tuesday. We'll be caught up to where we would normally be. So the three slides that are now going to be posted on YouTube, of course. You do want to see those because at least one of those is very high probability of being on the exam. The first three on week 14 were the Church of Saint Denis, the first one, ambulatory. Then the second, Chartres Cathedral facade, and then the nave of Chartres Cathedral. We stopped right there. So I also held up a diagram, and I don't want to go, like I said, in reverse here because we want to, make up for some of the lost time. But that's, of course, on the video that will be posted before 8 p.m. on Friday. Let me go ahead and do the speaker view here. And that's an important piece of information. I absolutely strongly urge you to make sure you watch. And maybe, I don't know if you guys could take a screenshot if it's on a laptop, probably not if you're looking at this lecture on your phone, but for review purposes, or obviously almost everyone wasn't able to see that because of the delay and the hassles that happened Monday. So you want to watch that whole video and except for the last few minutes where people ask questions about their own grades, obviously, but the beginning especially where there was
Professor Wilson.
Sure, please go ahead.
Sorry, I had just a quick question. Just about attending class versus watching it on YouTube. Just because I've noticed, like for our exams and stuff, I was just rewatching everything on YouTube after class. So then I kind of started transitioning to just watching the YouTubes because then I wouldn't have to do both. Do you count attendance on like YouTube watching versus physical class?
That is an excellent question, and it's perfectly timed, so thank you for asking it. It's a matter of personal, I would say, priority to me that people should, but I don't count attendance after the first 3 weeks. That's when we're required to do that. And I did that with, those mini bios and also just looking at the names along the side with the list of participants, of course. But after that, once we turn in what we call this, the faculty has to do every semester, census, roster, and drop no-shows, then it's up to you. Since this is a college level class, I allow you the option, but I would strongly urge, since obviously I can see everyone who's here, I've noticed this group among the total enrollment, it's roughly 2/3 of the normal total, enrollment seem to attend regularly when there's no glitch on the internet. I would continue to do that, and you don't need to watch the reviews then, unless the YouTube videos, unless you do, which I assume you would for refreshing, your review purposes for the exam, for the final, all the ones of the YouTubes that will be posted, of course, after the midterm. So it is the same lecture, and so if you can't for some reason physically attend my live lectures, why would it be more important to attend live lectures? First of all, I just think it's helpful to be able to actually in real time see all the information, but more to your advantage is the questions like you're asking now, or any other people, all the classes I've had online. It helps for you to be able to ask in real time a question and get an immediate answer to like what you just asked. And with a video, you can't do that. So I strongly urge you, if you only have time to do one or the other, then since you signed up for a non-asynchronous, isn't that the phrase? Or is it synchronous class? You should try to watch them in real time. But then you have the option of refreshing your memory by going to the YouTube. But you have to do both, definitely. And I don't take roll. Okay, hope that helps. Anybody else? It's important.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The point is here now, of course. We've had enough various interruptions. At least we didn't have streakers. I didn't use Zoom the first semester. We used it. I did something else. And we had that problem. I didn't, but some of the other instructors here, I'll see you in. Hi, you didn't miss anything. We're just about to start the first slide, which will be the fourth one on the list for Gothic architecture. So let's get to that in a minute, but I will stick around afterwards. Okay, Serena, good. All right. So the point is that what we have now is Gothic architecture and sculpture and painting will be the last topic, the last week before reviewing for the final. And so what the final, of course, is, well, it's not obvious. It's going to be on the Monday. So you guys, will have, 5 days from the last lecture the previous week. Wednesday's lecture will be the last new slides. 5 whole days to study, and it's an open book, open no test like the midterm. But I want to get us started grading them. So in other words, I'm going to have the test on it's on your syllabus, but just as a heads up. So that means we have 3 weeks more of material. Well, not even quite, because Monday, most of you weren't able to attend through no fault of yours or mine. So do watch those. I'm sorry, I forget who asked that question, but you want to go back and see those. According to several students now, it's not hard to get onto my new channel on YouTube. You just have to write the same or plug in the same Google search. Right, Mark Wilson's SRJC Art History Lectures 2, right? It just no space, the number 2, and then you'll be able to navigate from there to get to whatever lecture you missed or want to watch over, review. Okay, so any more questions? Let's save them for the end. So let's get going because we do have some catch up, but I'm not going to rush through this because the main point I'm making now before we start, for most of you who didn't see any of the other Gothic slides, the 3 that I did cover on Monday, which will be on YouTube by 8 p.m. Friday. This is really important to mention that at least one of the Gothic architecture slides will be on the slide essay part of the final, and possibly a second Gothic slide, whether it's sculpture, architecture, or painting, because it's an important topic and it is our last topic. And look at the syllabus, it's 3 weeks we've spent, and that tells you right there that it must be more likely that those slides would be, some of them will be on. But I can tell you absolutely unequivocally, one of the slides that we are either I showed on Monday, which you can watch on YouTube, or today or next week, the architecture of Gothic churches will be on the slide essay part of the exam, and we'll cut the list down like always. Okay, let's get started since we have pretty much a full house now. Okay, so let's do the screen share. And the first slide is one that I can tell you from personal experience is an emotional kind of a connect, has an emotional connection to me. Can everybody see this now? Yes?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
I just always lean to make sure because occasionally there's a glitch. As you may have noticed. Okay, here's our first must know for today, which is actually it's down on the middle of the list for week 14, Notre Dame Cathedral. I must assume all of you heard what happened with the fire that happened here about 2 years ago. No, now it's 3 years ago, isn't it? Yeah, it was 3 years ago. Yeah, before the pandemic. Notre Dame, I'll spell that for you, the name of the cathedral, 2 words, Notre, second word, Dame, which means Our Lady. In other words, that's the phrase in French for Mary, the mother of Jesus, according to the Bible. So Notre Dame Cathedral, Paris, and the date is 1250. This is my own slide of this church. I think it's the most beautiful church in the world, and I'm not alone in that. A few million other people seem to think that, because you could start with this if you want to, as the first fact on the meaning, but you'll have to remember this for the exam, that it is always listed, this church, this cathedral, on the UNESCO World Heritage List survey about once every, I don't know, every few years, like 5 years. So the UN does a survey around the world of people in all the countries that belong to the UN. What are their favorite buildings? And this one is always in the top 10, almost always. I told you, right, the Taj Mahal is usually near the top, if not at the top of those lists. But this is very much near the top of that. Why? Because here's the main fact. You should start now with this if you didn't write that last point I just mentioned, which is that this is considered the classic, or ideal, if you want to say that, example of French Gothic architecture. And since most of you weren't able to attend Monday's lecture, I will repeat this part. The French invented Gothic architecture. They invented this style. And this is considered the most beautiful Gothic church in the world. Nobody really argues with that. One or two people might pick the one we covered on Monday, which is in a small town, like 50 or 100 miles outside Paris, called Chartres. And again, slides are 2 slides of that church from the syllabus will be on the YouTube channel by Friday night. But the point is, most people agree this is the most beautiful Gothic church in the world. It's also the 3rd oldest Gothic church. You could just write the 3rd Gothic church ever to be designed. And it has always been the cathedral of Paris. Now, you remember what cathedral is? That is a term that you remember from last week on Romanesque cathedrals. I can guarantee you it'll appear at some point on the final, and as far as knowing what that means. So there's a bishop, in other words, who presided over this cathedral when it was designed, and that bishop, and it would have been no question, of course, a man, obviously. So he would have been the architect. And so when this church was built, there were only 2 other Gothic churches in the world, both in France. But this was the 3rd oldest Gothic cathedral or church of any kind. Remember, not all churches are cathedrals, right? So we've already covered that. I won't repeat that definition, except that the part of it that you should have in your notes for this slide is that this church was designed by the Bishop of Paris to be the Cathedral of Paris. What makes it classically Gothic? That's the main part of the meaning here. And we're lucky, at least I consider, that the world, according to the UNESCO World Heritage List and all those surveys they've done, most people would agree. We're lucky it didn't get totally demolished. That fire had it gone on another hour. This whole facade, the front of the church, remember that word is helpful, though it's not a separate definition you have to know for the final facade, right? The front of a building. That whole facade, towers and all, would have collapsed in a heap of rubble if the fire had gone on much longer. So I think the world was lucky that it got stopped. I can tell you it's the most beautiful interior, and you're going to see my own slides of that with the stained glass, where you won't, and after we finish the notes on this slide, then you can put your pens or your fingertips down and rest them. And you can just watch the next 4 or 5 slides, or I think it's 6, that I show the church up close and in the interior, which you can't do now. If you go to Paris, it's closed to the public because it's going to take years to restore the interior. And you could mention that as a fact, that it survived a fire in 2019 that nearly destroyed it. That could be one of your 6 facts if this is on the slide essay part of the final. Okay, so why is it considered such a classic or perfect example of French Gothic? First of all, the symmetry of it. There are 2 towers that are identical. Well, actually, technically, they're not. Now, that should confuse you, and I mean it to confuse, unless you know this already. The towers are visually identical, but technically, there's something different about the 2 towers between each other. But they look symmetrical, and they are balanced left to right, of course. So you can just say it's symmetrical. There are 2 towers. You don't want to say identical, just say twin towers. Flanking each other on the, obviously that makes this symmetrical, and we'll do the formal analysis in a couple minutes. So the symmetry of it, the balance of it from left to right is pleasing to most people, right? And that's typical of most French Gothic cathedrals. Then there's, what else makes it Gothic, are the pointed arched doors and windows. So let's go to this close up here toward the bottom. And you can see the doors, there are 3 of them. Now that's an important part of the meaning of this. Every Catholic cathedral, not just Gothic, every Catholic cathedral, and most Catholic churches, but just say every Gothic cathedral has 3 doors or 3 entrances. And those are called the triportal, just like the word sounds, one word, triportal. three-part entrance. Why? Because of the symbolic meaning. These three doors symbolize the three holiest figures of the Catholic Church, and they are not the Pope. No, not him. God, supposedly, right, the top figure in the Catholic Church. Second, Jesus, right, and then third, it's not Mary, it's the Holy Ghost, supposedly some spirit that God sends down to earth when he wants to send a message to people on earth. So I'll see again, the Holy Trinity of three holiest figures in the Catholic Church are symbolized by the three doors, which are called triportals. And those three holiest figures are God. I assume that's the bigger arch, it would mean that's dedicated to him. God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost, or Spirit. Sometimes they say the word Spirit. And you don't have to understand any of that. That just literally is a statement that the Catholic Church decided to make about their churches, all of them, even the earlier ones, Romanesque, all the way through modern ones that have no Gothic features. One last thing about the meaning that is important is this slide is probably the best I have that you're going to see in these next two lectures about Gothic architecture, of the rose window. And remember, the two or three of you who were here on Monday, and when you see my video after it's posted Friday, you'll understand this is a feature of all Gothic churches, not just cathedrals. A large round stained glass window, that's what a rose window is. Again, a rose window, or a very large round stained glass window, is a basic feature of Gothic churches. The one thing you don't see is the flying buttresses, because I was deliberately getting up close to get the facade in. I took this slide after I'd been teaching here at the JC for several years, one of my last trips to Paris. And that's because the light is often so harsh on it when it's, in shadow, that you can't see the detail. So obviously it was a gray overcast day, and it was in December. And so you can see all the pointed arches. That's a basic, remember, that is definitely how you recognize a Gothic church. All the doors and windows are pointed. So the pointed arches, the rose window, and then the third feature would be the flying buttresses, which you're going to see in the next couple of slides. But for now, we'll just say those are stone buttressing or supports made of stone along the wall sides and back of the church. And if it isn't clear what those are, because I didn't hold up the diagram, but you'll see that again on the video on YouTube. I drew a diagram of how those look. We're going to see them in the next slide of mine of this church. But if this is on there, you don't have to do more than just say there are flying, two words, buttresses, just like, the word buttress. There's a rows of these stone buttresses that line the walls, the outer walls of the church. Now, if again, you happen to have seen, you couldn't have on YouTube, it's not posted yet, but the two or three people who were here on Monday, you might be asking, where is the tall tapering spire? That's one of the basic elements of Gothic church architecture. It's there. It's behind the two main towers. Okay. So we're going to do a formal analysis now. There's not much more you need to add. Remember, any architecture slide, what style that building is a part of the meaning. And I just gave you the three main features that you should have in your notes about what features mark this or make this a Gothic style cathedral. The rose window, the pointed arch doors and windows, and the flying buttresses that you can barely see the edges of one of them here. The stone supports or buttressing along the side. The other features, you have to go inside to see those. Well, the tall tapering spire, but it's behind these two towers. We will see it in my other slides. But for now, let's wrap up this slide with formal analysis. Is it balanced? Well, I'm going to say visually, yes, it appears to be, exactly the same amount of weight or size, right, mass on both sides of the church, because the two towers look identical. Actually, they're not. I'll explain that in a minute. You don't have to write that now. So you could say roughly balanced or visually balanced left to right, and unbalanced, of course, because there's empty space between the towers toward the bottom. The color is a cool off-white. The gray is from pollution. There are a lot of cars and buses and trucks in Paris. So of course they have to clean. That's what they were doing with the scaffolding. They were cleaning it, during the Christmas break, I guess it was when I was there last time. So you can just say the real color is this, the off-white color of cool white stone. And the textures are the real rough texture of stone and the real smooth texture of glass. And then the doors, you only see, well, actually you can see these, is a real rough wood texture. Just the doors are wood. So there's three real textures. The rhythm is obvious. All the doors and windows have pointed arches. And then there's sculpture. You don't have to describe them, but those are figures of the past kings and queens of France. You could add that if you want to, as one more fact in your notes on the meaning. But since we're doing the formal analysis, you don't have to go back to that. But just say that creates rhythm, the statues, and they are of kings and queens, earlier kings and queens, previous kings and queens of France, of course. And so that creates rhythm, as does the decoration on the rose window. Right? That's why they call it rose window. It's supposed to look like a giant rose petal. Or blossom, I should say, not petal. Okay, then what do we have for stable? Well, of course, any building with right angles, and this church, the towers, and the corners of the building itself, the facade, that's obviously all stable. But every detail is dynamic. The three doors, the tri-portals, the pointed arch windows, right, and the rose window. So it's both stable and dynamic. Here you don't see many shadows, but if there were on a sunny day, of course, any modeling is just the natural shadows from the sun. The line here is both visual and carved. It's carved on the statues, as you can probably see, including some around the doorways, right? On the three portals. So that's carved line, but most of the line is visual around the edges or corners of the building, the towers and the walls. And so there's no painted line. And let's see, am I forgetting anything? Mass, and space. Two rather important things. The mass, well, it's up to you to decide. I give you flexibility. Technically speaking, it looks like it's equal mass if you count each of these is its own structure. From the ground to the top of the tower is a single section or structure of that building. That's true of all towers. It's not just this part that's a tower, the whole thing. So it looks like there's two equal masses of the towers, and then they would be the two largest masses, and then the central facade or the central or middle section of the facade. And then finally for space, the two towers are about 240 feet tall. They have the same height. And then inside, the nave is 140 feet. That's a tall nave. There are taller naves, the ceiling, you know, what's inside the main aisle, right? Remember, it's called the nave. That ceiling's about 140 feet, and the two towers are about 240 feet. Now, I'm going to, do you have anything else now until, you know, we get to the next must know, which will be a couple slides from now after this one. But does everybody notice anything slightly different about these two? It's sort of a, I don't know what I call it, the brain teaser. I don't know if that's the right phrase. There's something different about this tower compared to this one. Look carefully at the, I'm giving you a clue where the cursor is, or even if you can mentally, you know, do a rough calculation of the distance between the edges of this tower and this one. Anybody notice there's anything that's slightly different between the two towers? It's not decorations or the overall shapes. Okay, it's the width. This tower is 2 feet wider than the one on the left, and no one knows why the bishop designed it that way, but obviously he was playing games, I guess you could say, having fun or something. This tower is the wider of the two. So when you know that fact, technically the largest mass would have to be the wider tower, right? The one on the left. And then the second largest would be the slightly narrower. And then there's one other difference, and this one should be easier to see. One of these three arches is different than the other two. Nobody's noticing this, but you probably are, and you just didn't want to speak up. Okay, this one has an extra point. Again, nobody knows why. There's no historical record of what the bishop was thinking. He was just playing around, having fun, I guess. Okay, so that's one of the most important slides. If I forgot, I apologize. This slide is so high up on the list, you can count it as probable of being either on the slide ID or the slide essay part of the final. It's just one of the most important slides you're going to see in this half of the semester. Now you can rest your note-taking hands, pens, whatever. laptop keyboards and just look and listen for a couple of minutes here. These are my own slides. The back end of Notre Dame. There's your tall tapering spire, one of the 5 basic elements of all Gothic style churches. And that was added in the you don't have to know this, but it was added in the mid 1800s. You know, you could write that if you want, but that's why you don't see it from the front, because it's on the back, or near, not right on the back, but near the back end of the roof. That collapsed in the fire, by the way, if you didn't know. It melted. It melted. The fire was that hot. It was 2,000 degrees. Can you believe that? The intensity of the flames. So it's amazing. In fact, so did the metal on top of the roof. Much of that melted, not all of the domes. But the stones survived, thank heavens, including, there they are, the flying buttresses. So let's get up a little closer. Those are the stone arms, I call them, like arms of a giant that's reaching up, you know, from below and holding the wall up. That's the metaphor or image I like to use to compare. But they literally support the wall of the church. And as I said with the first couple slides, I think it was the 3rd slide I showed on Monday, that's the essence of Gothic architecture. If you didn't have these flying, because they're detached, that's why they're called flying buttresses. I know it's an odd phrase, but that's the right term for these supports. If you didn't use those flying buttresses, you could never make windows that wide. This is almost a wall of glass. There's hardly any stone here. Look at that. This is like about 3/4 of the width of this entire back end of the church is glass, not stone. That would be impossible with any earlier style of architecture before Gothic. So Gothic architecture made it possible. This could be true if any Gothic church, and I guarantee one of them will be on the slide as you part, as one of the facts that this style allowed for these walls of windows. It does here, it did in the Cathedral of Chartres that I showed on Monday, and it will again in some of the other Gothic churches you're going to see later today or next week. It's just a unique feature of Gothic architecture, because the point being, you don't have to remember this detail, but that supports the weight of everything above it. So the walls don't have to carry the weight of the roof or the tower. There, tapering spire actually is what it is. Those are the towers in the front. So the tapering spire is pretty heavy, right? It was designed to have that originally. It just wasn't built during the Middle Ages for some reason. So what we have, in other words, is walls. The phrases I like to use, it's my own way of describing this phenomenon, this idea. Let's see another view here from a different angle. Yeah, this is what when I tell people, you know, if I've had some of my students will ask, if they're going to Paris for the first time, obviously they would want to see this church. Even if you can't go inside it, you should take some time to walk around it. This is a view from across the river. It's on an island in the middle of the Seine, which is the river that passes through Paris. So here's your tall tapering spire. They're your identical towers, but remember this one's slightly wider. Here's your rose window. All the windows everywhere, and we know the doors I just showed you on the front are all pointed arched. And then here are the flying buttresses. They're really, like somebody described them as a forest of stone. I prefer it as like arms of stone, but either way, they are very, very graceful in this cathedral. It's in a way surprising. Look how thin they are compared to the thickness of the walls, but that's enough to support the weight of the roof itself and this massively heavy metal spire without having to use the walls to support the weight of anything above it, the walls. And so that's what we mean when we say Gothic architecture allows for walls of windows. Here's another view of it where you can see the setting. Not that anybody here been to Paris? I can't remember when the mini bios now. It's been almost over 3 months. Anybody here been to France? No? Well, if you ever go, you want to not just go to the Louvre. I mean, yes, do that, of course, but spend a day just walking around the city on a, you know, especially on a nice, you know, it's a winter day, but it doesn't matter what time of year you go. I think it's the most beautiful city in the world. And I'm certainly not alone in that. Wasn't it Ernest Hemingway said, all good Americans go to Paris when they die. Of course, he lived there for many, many years. And I think his first 2 marriages were in Paris. Anyway, so we have the cathedral with the spires and the flying buttresses, and you can see how it dominates the central island. There are only 2 islands in the middle of the river in Paris, and both of them are, you know, heavily populated. You know, where the city began was on those islands. So there's been a cathedral there since Roman times, but this is, of course, the most recent one, nearly 800 years old. All right, and then these next two you also can just take a look at. These are the interior of Notre Dame, and you're not allowed when it was open, and once it reopens, and it will for tourists or worshipers, you're not allowed to bring tripods or flashes into the church. So you have to use either your, as I did, my girlfriend's head or a friend, shoulders wouldn't work. The top of someone's head or one of the pews. Yes, they have pews in this church that are there with, heavy wooden pews to steady your camera, unless you just, are very good at, whoa, there we go. I knew that was going to happen, but didn't think it would be that fast. Let's get back to this view. That's a closer view, slightly closer. Oh, that's the altar at the bottom, as it's always in the back of the Catholic Church. The ambulatory, we talked about that on Monday, where the very first Muslim slide is that curved walkway behind the altar. But what I want to focus on is these incredible stained glass windows. Now, obviously, I was taking it at a very low shutter speed. Some of you don't even know what I'm talking about because you've only ever used digital cameras. But with a 35 millimeter, I know some of you must have studied photography. I think I remember that from some of your mini bios. You know that for even now, for many professional photographers prefer 35 millimeter. Yep, even some film images still are what you see in books, magazines, and even on the internet. These windows are some of the most beautiful. There are people who debate whether these are the most beautiful stained glass windows in the world, or at least a Gothic church. Others think the ones at Chartres are. But either way, they have to be some of the most beautiful. The reason I want to show you that's 140-foot high ceiling. It's like a 14-story building to fit inside this church. And then the last slide I'll show you, I might have included it as one of the must know. Sometimes I do that. Nave of Short Cathedral, Prophets and Ancestors, Notre Dame. Hang on, I'm just double checking because I alter things slightly from one semester to another. Yeah, I don't have this on the list, so you don't have to take notes. The next slide will be the next must know. But this is a life-size statue of Mary and her baby Jesus, and it's the most beautiful image of her in a medieval piece of sculpture, or most beautiful image of her in stone, you could write that way, that I've ever seen, that many people agree is, and nobody knows who carved it, and it survived the fire. And it's often called the Chinese Madonna. I didn't name it that. Christians from Taiwan or mainland China, there's tens of millions of Christians in China, as in communist China, where they're not supposed to be able to go to church, but they do. And in Hong Kong, I've seen the churches, and then my neighbors from Taiwan, he's Chinese Christian. They come here sometimes from Asia or parts of the other countries where they've moved, just partly to see and pray for their deceased loved ones underneath the statue. It's a Catholic tradition where you light a candle for the spirit of a departed loved one. And I got to watch a tour bus full of Christians from Taiwan, right? The island off of China that's not under communist rule. And they were talking, their minister, I guess he was, in English and I guess Cantonese, right? Both languages, about this statue and the history of it. It's a mystery. Nobody knows who carved it and why it's so much more lifelike. I mean, look at baby Jesus. That looks like a real baby, not like some of the horribly bad paintings of Mary and Jesus that you'd see in that period. This is from like the 1200s, so it's mid-medieval. It's not Renaissance. Okay, let's get to our next must know. This is Prophets and Ancestors of Christ at Chartres. That was the cathedral I showed on Monday, which is also very high probability of being on the final. This one, I won't say that is the case of. To be honest with you, I even wouldn't show it, except it's the only good quality slide that I got from the, Stockstead file from the textbooks, slide file. That shows this kind of sculpture. It's called, the title of this must know is Prophets and Ancestors of Christ. Prophets, Prophets, and Ancestors of Christ. Chartres, I'll spell it again because most of you weren't able to see this. Slides of Chartres on Monday, obviously. Artres. Chartres is the town and actually the cathedral, but you can just write Chartres. That location is the city here. Chartres, city in France, of course, 1155. So these were sculptures done in the door jamb. So they're jamb sculptures. We covered what that means, remember, with the Romanesque, two door jamb sculptures from the Romanesque period. Or it was one actually, last week. Any statue in the door jamb of a building, but whether it's a church or not, is a jamb statue. So these are in the along the three doorways. Remember, the tri-portal is part of all Gothic churches, and this happens to be cathedral, right? But any Gothic church, no matter what style, I'm sorry, I meant any Catholic, I misspoke. Any Catholic church will have three doors. So this is one of the three doorways. And these are life-size images of prophets from the Bible, from the Old Testament. You can just say the first part, if you prefer to write it that way, of the Bible. There are figures that predated Jesus. That's why it says ancestors of Christ. Prophets just means a holy person from the Bible who was alive before Jesus. That's, you don't have to know that, but that's what the word means if you're curious. And that's Propheets. So we have here figures that not only symbolize early holy figures from the Bible before Jesus, but also past kings and queens of France. That's the second part of the meaning, or the other part, purpose for these statues, is that they also were supposed to symbolize previous rulers of the Kingdom of France. In other words, they had a dual purpose, both religious and political. And so, of course, the priests or whoever it was that designed them, or commissioned them, let's say, for a sculptor to carve them, was trying to send the message that not only should you respect the figures from the Bible, those that we pray to, right, when you come to church, in this building, but you should also have the same respect and, let's say, admiration even for our monarchy, right? The rulers of France, the hereditary monarchy. As I think monarchy is usually hereditary, not always passed down from father to son, or sometimes father to daughter, or a queen to a son or daughter. It's always hereditary, and in France it was the same family for over 1,000 years ruled France until the French Revolution. So summarizing it briefly, these figures symbolize both the early holy figures, or you can say, just like the title tells you, prophets and ancestors of Jesus from the Old Testament of the Bible, but also they symbolize the previous, the political ruler class, you can just say the ruling class of France. So there's both a political and a religious message, these sets of figures. And then the last thing to say about the meaning is, look how stiff and formal they are. That's why I don't really find this slide that, interesting, frankly. I know that's terrible to say about, but it is the only example you're going to see of these stiff, formal poses here of men and women who literally don't seem to have much emotion or liveliness to them. They're not in movement. It's totally, in other words, totally different than a Romanesque style sculpture. Remember, those had almost the whole set of figures on the Romanesque bas-relief panels that we saw. Those were in motion. They were moving. They were dynamic. These are just the opposite. They're stiff, formal, and completely stable. So let's do a quick form analysis and move on to more interesting slides. All right, so these are by definition stable. There's only one thing dynamic, and that's their halos behind their heads. They do have good similar texture though, on the robes and the hair and their faces, and that's all done with carved line. Each figure is about the same height, so I don't see a larger or smaller mass here. They're pretty much the same, so 4 roughly equal masses. But for space, they are life-size, intact or complete human figures, which overlap the columns, of course, they're attached to, and their clothes obviously are overlapping their bodies. The line is all carved line, and of course, that's what creates the similarity of textures. So carved line, the colors are on the sculpture, they're cool, whereas on the walls of the building, it's a light yellow. I mentioned on Monday, the outside of the church, the first must-know slide for Gothic architecture of the outside of this cathedral is a yellow warm color, But here, I think you can see these are cool. You only have to focus on the carved statues, not the rest of the building around them, if it's on exam. And then there's the modeling, of course, is the shadows from the sun, and each figure is balanced. And there's the obvious rhythm of the arms and hands and heads. Okay, let's move on, since I think we're going to be able to not quite get caught up today, but get closer. All right, so the next must know is actually it's on, and I am going to cut at least one of slide from both today's lecture and one of the next week's. So I'm just giving you that ahead of here. Let's see what we're doing here. We're on, hang on. I'm going to double check something because I might cut one right now, but before we get to the next must know. Okay, Notre Dame. Vaulted, see, here it is. It's on this week's list. The vaulted ceiling of Amiens Cathedral. Vaulted, V-A-U-L-T-E-D, ceiling of Amiens is a city in France, A-M-I-E-N-S. Vaulted ceiling of Amiens Cathedral, France, 1288. So what we're going to see here is actually this slide. These are not my own slides, but I've done this. I've been in this church, and it is mind-blowing because it's the tallest nave in France. So you want to start with that. That inside this cathedral in a town in France called Amiens is a ceiling that's nearly 170 feet tall. The nave itself is nearly 170 feet, like 167 or 8 feet, something like that, nearly 170 feet. That's remarkable. So it is the tallest nave in France. And the ceiling is what's important when you look up at it from below. There's another view. The ceiling, of course, we're going to look at the next slide. Is it focused on just this part? But I want you to see this is from the side aisle, and look at the light. The light that comes through this set of windows, this wall of windows, is brighter than most Gothic churches because they didn't finish the stained glass. In fact, look carefully, only this window was completed at the back end of the church, the very far end of the nave. And so that's why it's brighter and it's easier to see and photograph the interior of this church than most Gothic cathedrals. So here's the Gothic groined vaulting. That's the main reason I show you this slide and put it on the syllabus. It shows what the fifth and final feature of all Gothic architecture, Gothic church, architecture is, and that's only, you can see it only on the interior, of course, and that's on the ceiling. Gothic groined vaulting. Now, at the end of this lecture, I will hold up that same diagram, but since, at least 2 or 3 people that were here on Monday were able to log on late, have already seen it. They don't need to stick around for that. But for those who want to, just make sure it's clear, what those features are. I'll hold that up at the end after we finish our last slide for today. And of course, as always, stick around and answer any questions you have. All right, so these, where I have this, cursor is, these are the groins, and they meet here, right, every, 10 feet or so, and they form pointed arches. If you look carefully, right, that's why I showed you this view from here. I think you can tell that these rise into points, right, when you see it from the side. So, but this would be the view, if this slide, I'm not saying it's so important, I might or might not cut it from study list, which we'll decide on the week prior to the final, of course, when we do the review. Okay, so the flying buttresses would attach right here. And, if you walked around the church, you'd see the flying buttresses roughly every 10 feet. Actually, wherever these thicker columns are, there's a flying buttress on the outside that meets the wall. And that's what allows this wall of windows that we've been talking about, where you have the wall of glass or wall of windows that only Gothic cathedrals could do. Otherwise, it would have collapsed. This church wouldn't have been able to support the weight of those heavy towers. So there's your Gothic groined vaulting, the way it looks from inside. And you've got, of course, again, part of the meaning could be that you see the pointed arches. Every window has pointed arches. And I just mentioned the flying buttresses, which you don't see, but they're there, that meet the outside, along the outside of the wall every so many feet. Okay, that's pretty much the whole meaning of this. And I already mentioned the fact it's unusually light interior and why. So let's do a quick formal analysis, and then I think we'll be able to get at least part way through what today's lecture slides were on the syllabus. Okay, it's a black and white slide, yeah, but it wouldn't make much difference. It was, I can tell you, it's cool and gray, the stonework. The textures of the rough texture, a real texture, of course, of the stone, and the real smooth texture of the glass. The rhythm, again, should be obvious. The pointed arch windows, the Gothic groined vaulting, and the columns. Now, the colors, it is cool gray, but I should mention there's some, warm color on that one stained glass window, but you can't see that in the slide, so you can just ignore that. The lines here, again, you can just focus on the stonework, and if this is on the final, is all a visual line. You don't really see carved line here. You would on the outside of the church. So this is all visual lines around the edges of the pointed arches, right? And the groin vaulting. And then it's dynamic on the arches and the ceiling, stable on the columns. And you could say the edges of the windows. The modeling is just the natural shadows from the sun, mostly visible on the side aisles here, where the sun doesn't shine through there, obviously. So that creates natural modeling. It is balanced, completely symmetrical, left to right. And I would say, depending where you drew a line halfway up the wall, the top half would be, of course, the same height as the bottom half. So it's balanced both ways. And the largest mass would be the ceiling with that groin vaulting. And then I would say it would be, it's close call, but I would say it's the arches. And then the windows, individual windows. Okay, now, this is the rose window, and let's see, did I take it off or leave it on? Because I altered things a bit, hang on. No, so you could just rest again for a couple of minutes. These are my own slides from inside Notre Dame. One of the two largest rose windows in the world, both of which are at Notre Dame. And it's a miracle they were not damaged at all by that fire that raged for like 8 hours or something, 10 or 12 hours. They thought they couldn't salvage the windows, but they were able to somehow. I guess the stone just held in place, but the lead buckled. That this is lead. Here, I'll do a close up. See that there where each panel is inlaid or set into the stonework. You don't have to write any of this. That's how these windows were created, with separate pieces that were painted, obviously in a workshop of some kind. And then I assume they soldered them. I don't know how else they could have gotten to stay in place within the stonework. But these are supposed to look like the petals of a rose. That's why it's called the rose window. This rose window is 40 feet across. It's one of the two largest. And very quickly, since we were just on that, I'll show you where they are on this slide. There are two, one on each end. Those are called, you don't have to know this word, the transepts or arms, some people say, of the cross. The shape of the church, the floor plan is a cross, as Catholic churches always are. And then here's a close-up. And it should be obvious, that's Mary and her baby Jesus. And then these are various prophets again from the Bible. But look at the colors, rich, deep, saturated. Some people call these deep, rich colors of blue, red, yellow, purple. But I actually like this window best, the purple one, where the colors are much more, even deeper, richer colors. If you sat here, just a tip for those who may ever get to this building once it's reopened, they're saying it'll be done in 5 years. I don't believe it. I think it'll be 10 before it's fully safe to reopen. But eventually when it is, if you get to go here, go in the daytime on a sunny day. I think it's best if it's in a warm. Most Americans travel in the summer, right? Vacation then or whatever. When, it's not going to be so cloudy and the sunlight is the most intense. The rays of the sun coming through one of these giant 40-foot wide rose windows create patterns on the floor that you don't have to have any chemical enhancement to get high. Sitting there in a pew I've done that with people who lived in Paris who, even though they come to the church whenever they feel like, because they live there, are themselves just as entranced. It's a almost hypnotic experience to watch the colors change very slowly, of course, so you can't be in a hurry, over say even an hour or half an hour, even when the sun, of course, is moving across the sky and the colors move with the beams of sun. It's a unique experience. All right, let's get to our, oh yeah, I forgot about this. Here's the, I call it the Monty Python. Anybody seen Monty Python's cartoon figures that they used to put into their movies? Like, of course, the right, Holy Grail and some of their other goofy movies where they have paintings. Well, this is an original hand-painted scene of a peasant. Doesn't look happy, does he? Well, why would he be? The peasants were slaves. That's all, the serfs, they called them. They had no rights. They were owned by their masters, just the way slaves in, you know, America up until the Civil War were. It was not a good life. And so whoever painted that image of that peasant farmer captured more realistically the state of mind of the people who were forced into that kind of servitude. Okay, now the next must-know. Okay, this is Reims or Reims Cathedral. You know what? I did have the rose window on the list. Oh, shoot. I almost left it before. I'm going to make it this one because I think, well, no, let's make it this one. I'm going to do the formal analysis. I apologize. I'm sorry. I've had so much on my plate lately that it is my bad that I didn't stop and look closer. As I said a moment ago, a couple minutes ago, I did reserve the right to, you know, add or subtract slides from the study list. But this one, it's unique enough. I think I should repeat that. You don't have to write like, you know, 4, even 2 paragraphs. One will do. This is one of the 2 largest. So remember, the title is Rose Window at Notre Dame Cathedral. I may cut it from the study list, but for now, we should just do these notes and we can do it pretty quickly. Paris, 1250. It's one of the 2 largest rose windows in the world. The 2 on Notre Dame. Okay, the second thing is that a rose window is a basic feature on all Gothic style churches, not just cathedrals. So I'm giving you just the bare bones facts about the meaning. The second thing is it's called a rose window because it's supposed to resemble a giant rose blossom with the petals being decorated by panels, painted panels. That's how these details are created. Hand painted panels of stained glass. That's what the word means. So each panel, then, another fact about the meaning is put in place with lead around the outer edge, is, you could say, inserted or placed into the stonework, right? And then the colors are always rich or deep colors. You say saturated if you prefer that word. That's what some historians would say. They're not just like a color on a painting, because the window, they're made this way, designed this way, that the light coming through the window creates very bright colors or patterns when people see the sun shine through these windows. And so they are meant to attract your attention, and they do. I just told you an example. And then finally, what's on these? I think that to be the 6th fact, right? Also, it's on Notre Dame, and I already told you what is all about the facts about that church. So that could be part of the meaning, if, I'm not saying it, very high probability, but if this were to be on the final, you could add any of the facts I already gave you about the church itself. But the last specific fact for this slide on the meaning would be that all these painted panels, it's true of all stained glass windows in Catholic churches, cathedrals or otherwise, are scenes of holy figures from the Bible, and some from daily life. In this case, we just saw one, a medieval peasant, but most of the figures are holy figures from the Bible. Formal analysis, pretty easy, completely symmetrical. See, that's not the rose window, right? So you can ignore that, just the round part. Completely symmetrical, balanced totally left to right, full of powerful rhythms. And of course, the textures, you probably can tell, are smooth, real glass and smooth, real, or not smooth, rough. Stone is always rough, real stone on these, obviously these spokes here. Some people call them spokes. That stonework, the dark part. and that's real rough stone. And then the only other texture you get, real smooth glass. The colors, a mixture of warm and cool. Purples, reds. Some people would call the purple warm because it's got a kind of warmish cast. And then yellows, but there's also blues and darker purples that would qualify as cool colors. The lines are all painted. Well, you could make the case these lines are visual. Yeah, you say they're both on the framework, because that is actually the framing of the window. We're looking at the stone framework. So those create rhythm, as do obviously each of these panels. And it's totally dynamic. I don't see anything stable about it. It's all round or diagonal lines everywhere. Completely symmetrical, right? And let me see, for space, it's 40 feet across. And the figures do show some overlapping, the painted figures. And there is a little bit of modeling on the painted figures, nowhere else. The window itself doesn't have modeling, of course, from inside. So it's just the painted figures have modeling on some of them. All right, here we go. Now we get to the next must know. And this one, I'm promised to cut at least two, more like three cathedrals. I totally understand how over the years people have often pointed out they start to look alike to most people, the different slides of cathedrals. So to cut down on the potential uncertainty or confusion for the final, I'll cut at least two, maybe three of the total of all the cathedrals from last week and this week. Okay. But for now, again, you should assume this might be on the final. It's Reims, R-E-I-M-S Cathedral. Reims, R-E-I-M-S Cathedral, France, 1428. So Reims Cathedral is the cathedral where the kings of France were crowned for several centuries. You can say until the late Middle Ages, or just say the Renaissance. It was the Renaissance when they switched, 1500s, if you want to write it that way. I'll say it again, repeat it slowly. This was the cathedral where all the kings of France in the Middle Ages were crowned until the 1500s, right? And then it moved to Paris. But obviously that means almost the entire Middle Ages for hundreds of years. Up until the 1500s, all the kings of France, they never had a queen, by the way. All the kings of France were crowned here. A second fact about it is that it is another example of a classic French Gothic. You see now these are identical, the twin towers, right? That you see here. And these have spires on them. They may not be as tall as the one at Notre Dame that you saw from near the back of Notre Dame in my slides around this outside of Notre Dame, but they qualify as tapering spires, which is a feature of Gothic churches. And now by now you all should recognize that obviously is the rose window on the front. All Gothic cathedrals, certainly cathedrals, have three rose windows, one on either side and one in the front. So that's the most obvious on this slide, a very good example, easy to identify, of one of the five main features that make this the Gothic style cathedral. And then you have the pointed arches. And remember, I already defined the triportal, which that means these symbolize, again, the three holiest figures, the Catholic Church. So I won't restate that. And all of the arches, all the way up to the top of the towers, the very tip of the tallest arches, are all pointed. The only thing you don't see from here are the flying buttresses, and of course, inside you on the ceiling, you would see the Gothic groin vaulting. Now, the color of this church is a warm yellow stone. It may not look like that here, but I've been to this church, and other photos show it that way. Excuse me, my throat's getting a little, it's the pollen, I think, in the air. Give me like 10 seconds here. A little bit of Starbucks leftover coffee. All right, so let's say the other three facts about it. One that most of you will find perhaps the most interesting. This city, Reims, or if you're in France, don't get confused. They themselves don't agree on how to pronounce the name of this city. I've heard it pronounced Reims, Reims, and Reims. I can't even say it the third way. So they'll have to give you a break. If you ask, as I did in a train station in Paris for a round trip ticket to Reims, just write it out. It's worth going because this is the birthplace of champagne. That's part of the meaning. Under the streets, in other words, under these cobblestone line the streets are the first champagne case in the world. Champagne was first invented, you could say, or discovered, depends on how you want to look at it, by monks over 400 years ago. They just accidentally produced this bubbly wine and everyone liked it. So obviously the rest is history. So this town is the birthplace, not the cathedral itself, but the caves underneath it, of Champagne. The final fact about the meaning is that this church was badly damaged. No, all the stained glass windows, almost all the stained glass windows were badly damaged in World War II by bombing. There was a lot of fighting with the Germans and the Americans that were liberating. That's the only word for it, liberating France from the Nazis. So what happened? The windows obviously are missing. You can see, in this slide, they were replaced with a modern artist painter style, and his name was Marc Chagall. I hope a couple of you heard of him. One of the most famous painters in the 20th century. Marc Chagall, Marc with a C, Chagall with two L's. Marc Chagall with a Chagall was a very prominent French painter. He was as famous as Matisse and Picasso in France at that time, and he's still very well known. His paintings are in almost every major museum in the US and Europe. He was a French Jewish painter. He left, in case you're curious, when the Nazis started attacking. He got out and he came back. After he came back, he was hired by the French government to redesign all the stained glass windows. I think about 5%, just say a couple of the windows are original Gothic ones. So in other words, bottom line, almost all the windows in this church are post-World War II, modern. They're definitely not medieval looking. They're not abstract either. They're just his style. There's no other way to say it. He has a unique style of painting if you've ever seen any of Chagall's artwork. I mean, there's scenes from being Jewish didn't matter to him. He did windows for synagogues, mosques, Buddhist temples, Catholic cathedrals. He was, universally admired and open-minded. So he designed, themes of the Catholic Church and the Bible for the features or the themes, the themes of the windows are related to the Bible, but he designed them in a modern style. It's very unusual. Okay, let's do a formal analysis. I think it's the only Gothic cathedral in France where that's the case. My voice about to give out, so I may just do one more slide. Well, maybe in slightly early. It's totally balanced, completely left to right, identical, unbalanced toward the bottom. Here we have towers that are about 260 feet, a little taller than Notre Dame. And a nave that surprisingly, that's not the ceiling, it's only up to about here, is only about 110 feet or 120, it's like 120 feet. The ceiling, right? So that's the space inside and the heights of the towers. Obviously, it's full of the rhythm of the pointed arches, the three doors. And again, the statues, always on a Catholic cathedral, statues of saints or ancestors of Christ. Well, actually, there they are on the ground level. It's dynamic on the pointed arches, the rose window, the tapering spires here, right? And it also is stable on the edges. The modeling creates natural, the sun, creates the natural shadows or modeling. And then the textures are the real smooth texture of glass, real rough texture of wood on the doors, and real rough texture of stone. The line is carved around the doorways and on the statues, a visual line on the corners and the edges of the windows. Let me see, am I forgetting anything? Yeah, I think I got all. The towers are identical mass. So there's no larger or smaller mass. Well, I guess the center of the building is the second largest mass. My voice is about to give out. I'll do one more slide because we did need to catch up. Okay. There is one more fact. This is flamboyant style. I'm sorry. It's on your list of terms to know. Flamboyant style. It's a one-sentence definition. It's a style of French Gothic architecture with flame-like decorations along the exterior. A style of late Gothic arc. I'll repeat that. So a style, flamboyant is a style of late Gothic architecture in France with flame-like decorations along the exterior. That's what we're looking at here. If you go down just a little bit, those are flames licking up the side. Of course, it's not. They're stone meant to look like the church is on fire. Well, they don't mean like fire. They mean with passion. Why was that style chosen in late medieval France for their Gothic cathedrals and other buildings? Because it symbolized the passion the people had for religion. Why? Because their daily lives were so awful, as I just point out with that peasant. If you were poor or even, whatever, a shopkeeper, even, you had no rights, or very, very few rights, if any. Definitely the peasants had absolutely no rights. Their lives were horribly dreary, depressing. And so the only hope they had was thinking next life will be better. Life after death will be better, which is what the church, of course, told them. So they were passionate about their religion. It was a time of the Black Death, multiple plagues, 100 Years' War, peasant revolts. It was a violent, depressing, and very dangerous time to be alive. The 13 and 1400s, you could just say the late Gothic period, when these churches were built in this style. French society was in complete, not chaos. I don't want to say like there was a king who ruled and he kept control, but there was wars, there were rebellions, there was famine. They had famine quite often. Not enough people got food, because the rich people had the control over who got fed. And of course, then plagues, plague after plague after plague. About every 10 or 20 years, there'd be another big plague. The worst one was the Black Death, as you may have heard of that, killed a third of Europe. One plague. That's worse than anything we are dealing with now. 1/3 of all adults, children, all over Europe died in the 1300s during the Black Death. And so this style was a response to that. Well, this life may be horrible, but we can have faith the future life in, heaven will be better if they believe the teaching of the Catholic Church. So these style of churches, these flamboyant, were symbolic of the masses' religious fervor or passion. Okay, I'm cutting this one from the study list, I think. Oh, it's not even on. I took it off already, so you get a break. I'm going to do, let's see, one more. Well, what time is it? It's 4:12. Yeah, because we need to get caught up. Okay, this is, it's from, let's see, did we 14? No, I think we're caught up. We're good. So let's pause here. Should stop share, and I'll take any questions you may have. I was going to hold up that diagram. That should be somewhat helpful for almost all of you. Obviously, weren't able to see this. But are there any questions now about anything related to grades? I think I got all of the papers that were turned in on time logged in. If anyone wants me to confirm they got their paper, they do need to ask me that in an email. If they didn't already do that, I already responded to quite a few people. Well, I can't find it. In one of those weeks. Oh, here it is. It's just way back. There it is. All right, let me hold this up and leave it up for at least. And let's make it straight. I have to go all the way back. There we go. The 5 main features of Gothic churches. We just covered them in the slides, but you haven't seen them diagrammed. So there you go. The tall tapering spire. Pointed arched windows. I should have said doors and windows, but that's obvious. Rose window, the flying buttresses, and inside you have to go inside to see the Gothic groin vaulting. This will come up, I can tell you, that somehow on the either true false section, or obviously if you have, and I just told you for sure there will be one Gothic church or cathedral, we'll just say cathedral, on the slide essay part. So you would want to remember those 5 features. So I think that hopefully, if it wasn't already clear how, all 5 of them go together in any Gothic style church, whether it's a cathedral or, they also use some of these same features. The Gothic style didn't only get used on churches. It was used on town halls, some castles, fortresses, but it's created for cathedrals first in France. And that was the first slide from last week. And that's, from Monday, sorry. You want to watch that video again, because the first slide is very high possibility being on the exam from Monday's lecture. And that was the Church of Saint Denis, the ambulatory means a walkway behind the altar. I explained all the things that relate to all the Gothic style slides in that first must-know slide, which you'll see posted again on YouTube by 8 p.m. or before 8 p.m. on Friday, sorry. Okay, questions? Anybody about anything we've covered? Extra credit, papers?
What was the color of the last one?
Oh, I think I glossed over it. Yeah, I should have said it's a warm yellow color. It looks cool in the slide, but I'm glad you asked that. I think I might have overlooked that or didn't focus on it. To clarify, it's a warm yellow stone, which is the same for Chartres, the first cathedral exterior we had on Monday. So normally most stone churches, the stonework is cool gray, but for some reason on a couple of the earliest cathedrals, or just say French Gothic, they got stone from different parts of their own mountains. I'm not sure where, probably the Alps, but somewhere in France, and it happened to have a yellow color, so that would make those churches warm. And the last slide I showed Reims, it was warm. Okay, any other questions? Now's a good time. Okay, so I know not everybody's paper that was due, but I got most of yours, and the ones that were turned in by now, if they were after the day they were due, is only 5 points off. But even if you were one of those few, I think it's now only maybe 3 people that I'm not going to call out any names that haven't already turned in your second paper. I would have, or you try to get it in soon, like in the next few days or week or so, because then you'll get it back sooner, well before time to review or study for the final. So that way you'll know your total points, except for extra credit, which I think everyone knows you have that option, all those options, that's several options you know now, but there's about a dozen. Oh, my goodness, I almost forgot. This is an important detail. I am going to go ahead with a walking tour, and it's worth 20 points, and it's easy. You don't have to do anything, write anything, but you do have to drive to Berkeley. I'll give you the starting point. It's going to be 2 o'clock on a Sunday. So let me do a quick consensus. I meant to do this at the start of the class because I see 2 people logged off before we got to the end here. So I'll send an email too, but I can only do a poll informally while you guys are online. Is how many people could make Sunday, the 15th of May from 2 to 4:30? If I'm not saying you're committing now to come to a walking tour, but if it's offered and you decide to go, obviously some people don't know yet your plans 2 weeks ahead, but is that date available? Is there anybody who can't? Let me rephrase the question. Anybody who couldn't even possibly make a tour in Berkeley on Sunday, May 15th? Anybody?
I can't.
Okay, so one person. How about Sunday, May 22nd? Those are the only 2 options. And I'll let you know by Friday. I'll know.
Yeah, I have work on Sundays, so I don't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's the same either Sunday for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, there are so many other options for extra credit,
Mhm.
but that means most people could make either day, right? Nobody else has either the 15th or 22nd blocked off. Okay, that's all I need to know. I'm going to do the same with my in-person class tonight, and again on my Monday night class 1.1. So I'll say it in live real time on the online Zoom lecture on Monday. We'll have the details, but I should also be sending you an email by this weekend And then I would just want people to give me some kind of RSVP so I know, and you can bring a friend if they'd like to come. And we'll get into buildings you'd never otherwise see. And if we're very lucky, we may be able to do a potluck at another historic home, not on the tour route, where you just bring one item, of course. And that would be another historic building, possibly Sarah Gill's house. Sarah Gill wrote one of the 2 textbooks. She's my mentor, friend, not a neighbor exactly, but she also lives in Berkeley. And she has an apartment with artifacts from every continent. It's it's almost like a mini museum, though they're not on display. They're just, on the walls and in her, display areas in her apartment. That's in Berkeley. And then there's another friend who owns a Maybach house in Berkeley where I often have. So you'll hear the details. I'll put them in an email and state them live in real time by Monday's class. But I'll probably send the email over the next 5 days or less, probably by Saturday. Okay, and that'll be worth 20 points, and that's an easy option. You just have to attend, and then if you don't want to stick around afterwards, as long as you logged in and stayed with the group, I'll be leading, of course, all of us around one neighborhood in Berkeley. And it's parking is free on Sunday. That's why I pick Sundays. So you don't have to worry about tickets. Okay, so I'll pick one of those 2 dates and then get back to you about the details. All right, any other questions at all about anything? Extra credit, grades? All right, I'll see, I hope everyone this time, or just about everybody, on Monday at the usual time, just after 3. Okay, have a good week or a good weekend. All right,
Thank you.
take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you next week.